Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. Today I have with me Abhijit Iyer Mitra. Abhijit, welcome to PGurus channel.
Har Har Mahadev.
Har Har Mahadev, Abhijit, and it is about Mahadev's country that we're going to talk about today. The line of actual control. The line of actual control is a position in the sand, or to quote Samuel Johnson, it's juxtaposition, but we don't know what and what. So take it away, Abhijit. When did this thing start? I guess we can go all the way back up to the 1950s when the first skirmishes started. Dalai Lama had fled from Tibet to India and so on and so forth. So let's just try and bring all the way from that point forward to now as to what is the latest situation. So let's just walk down the memory lane on this one.
Right. So remember, this whole decision to exacerbate the conflict with India wasn't actually Mao Zedong. It was Liu Shaoqi, who was then the president of China, and Zhou Enlai, who started this whole thing. Mao Zedong was slightly disgraced at this time during the Cultural Revolution, and he was sort of in hibernation at that time. And of course, Liu Shaoqi got his comeuppance because he was effectively, while he was still serving as the president of China, he was arrested by the Red Guard and tortured to death, while still president of China, technically, by Mao's Red Guard. So that was very good. And of course, Zhou Enlai died of cancer. That was also very good. But what basically happens is, since then, we never understand what the cost benefit of aggravating a perfectly good relationship with India was. And see, this has always been the problem, why people should never look at China as a benign country. They will invade you or harm you just because they can. There is no reason for it. Just like there is no reason for a wife basher to go around wife bashing or things like that. Now, what happens is the first serious attempt at solving this produced the first Chinese claim line, which was in 1959, which was further east. In 1961, they came up with a new claim line, which was about, depending on the area, it was 30 to 50 kilometers west of the 1959 claim line, which in itself shows you that, this wasn't about historical authenticity. It wasn't about restoring past wrongs, real or perceived or whatever. It was just, going on making a set of demands. And the assumption is that they would have accepted the 1959 claim line and said, oh, look, we're so gracious, we've left the 1961 claim line. Anyway, things didn't go as planned. And the 1962 war broke out, and they basically came in all the way to the 1961 claim line, more or less. In the east, in Arunachal, they basically withdrew. But in Ladakh, they stayed on. Now, it is the 1961 claim line, which becomes the LAC in 1962, that we have to deal with right now. Now, there is no map. We know what the Chinese claim is from the Chinese official cartographic geospatial website. We know what their claims are. We also know that they're not in control of that entire claim. So there is a fundamental difference between the 61 claim line and the 62 LAC, but it is quite minor. It isn't a significant difference. So what we've been seeing is you have a whole host of commentators who are basically playing around with the claim line to justify whatever sort of story they want to peddle in that sense. Technically, if you look at it, the claim line is quite well understood. All right. There is the Agricultural Survey of India and Ministry of Environment claim line in Galwan, for example, which mirrors the bend of the river. There is the Google Earth LAC, which is done in consultation with several government ministries. It no longer exists on Google Maps, but on Google Earth, they forgot to remove it from Google Earth. So it's still there on Google Earth. You can go check, which is about, say, 100 meters south of the Ministry of Environment. So 100 meters to our advantage in Galwan. And in there is something that Nirupama Menon Rao, the former foreign secretary, tweeted, about cartographers where they had placed it on the exact geographic coordinates. Now, the problem with that is that they actually placed Galwan west of Kabul. You see, our cartographers were just as incompetent then as they are now. They literally placed it west of Kabul. According to the written document, the official document they have submitted, Galwan lies west of Kabul. That is how ridiculous and third-rate our cartographers were even at that point of time, which tells you a lot of the core of the problem right now. The fourth claim line is that of Mr. Ajay Shukla, who keeps changing it 1.5 kilometers south, or now it becomes 700 meters south. He himself isn't clear. Apparently, even his sources aren't clear. They marked something for him on a map, on a terrain map, claiming it was 1 kilometer south, even a rudimentary measurement. Not even as the crow flies. As the crow flies, it's only about 300-400 meters south. As the road goes, as the river flows on the ground, it's about 700 meters into what I believe on the Chinese side of the LAC. And he was claiming before that it was 1.5 kilometers south. So he keeps changing his claims also every 15 days or 15 hours, depending on what story suits him. Basically, everybody's playing around with this claim. I go by the Google Earth claim simply because it was put in place based on consultation between Google and the government of India. So that is what the history of the LAC, if you want to understand it, is. In just to talk about two major points of difference that we have. Number one is in Gogra, in the hot springs area, where along the bend of the river, the Chinese claim a significant extra chunk, which is not in their possession. It is in our possession because it lies southwest of a ridge with a narrow valley, and they haven't come past that narrow valley. In Pangong, as far as I know, it has always been clear that the Chinese controlled up to finger 4, which is called Foxhole Point, which is one of those rare places where the mountain actually juts out into the sea, into the lake. So what happens here is in 1999, they built a road. In 2004, they asphalted it. And like we've already established, patrols do not meet control. Patrols mean you're surreptitiously going in somewhere that you're scared to set up something. You're scared to set up infrastructure, or you're not sure enough of your own claim to set up infrastructure. The only proof of possession, you know what they say, possession is 9/10 of the law, and infrastructure is 9/10 of possession. Infrastructure is the only proof of possession, and the Chinese set up a road right up to the tip of Foxhole Point in 1999, which they asphalted over in 2004. At the base of finger 6, between finger 6 and finger 7, they have an extremely powerful radar station, which can basically surveil the whole of that lake area for any kind of boats coming in and so on and so forth. So as far as I am concerned, and very importantly, the only official map on record that we have, which is the CIA 1962 map. It was the classified map that the CIA sent back to Washington from the Delhi office, shows the line of actual control, the seizure point where the Chinese had seized up to, running exactly at Foxhole Point. And there's a very good reason for it. Before Foxhole Point, east of Foxhole Point, the terrain is quite easy. It's quite indefensible in that sense. Foxhole Point, on the other hand, because like I said, it's a formidable mountain ridge sticking out into the river, it becomes like a natural wall. Crossing it is quite tough. It's quite difficult for us to cross it and put infrastructure on the other side. It's quite impossible for them to also, I mean, they can do it. We can also do it. But the amount of infrastructure it requires is easily detectable by satellite.
Now, there's also software available today from a company called Planet Labs. I think it's a subscription fee based thing that you can actually look at the latest satellite pictures to know where the positions are and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why is finger 4 and through 8 important for India? If you say that finger 4 is jutting into the lake, which means essentially there's a natural boundary at that point. Why is it important for India to be able to go patrol up to finger 8?
I don't know about the importance of patrolling. I don't believe in the importance of patrolling. I believe in the importance of control. Okay, so I generally don't take all these "we used to patrol" arguments seriously because they are lame arguments. It's like saying, your house in, you're where in Palo Alto, yeah?
San Jose, yeah.
St. Joe's. So you're in St. Joe's And imagine I come to your house, I run around your house for 5 minutes, and then I claim I own the house. No court is going to uphold that. Nobody is going to take me seriously because you own the documents. The name outside is yours. That is called infrastructure. Your house is infrastructure. Me running through your house, naked or not, or whatever, or creating a ruckus or claiming it's mine, doesn't make it mine. So please let us get this nonsense about patrols out of our head. Patrols are not proof of control. They are a patrol by its very nature is a fleeting, temporary walkabout. It's literally a stroll in the garden in that sense. All right. It does not connote control. I am only going by control. Now, why is it isn't important that we control up to 8, but it is important cartographically speaking that we don't give up our claims till past 8. Our claim isn't just till 8, it is past 8. So it is important that we do not give up our claims there, because in any final status settlement, if you acknowledge a de facto situation in a map and they say let's settle to where the situation is as on this date de facto, you end up losing land, which is why you never put it down in map. These people understand that and they're exploiting it.
Well, today, as things stand now, has China retreated and has India also retreated, or is it just something again made up by MSM?
There has been no retreat. There has been disengagement from the more or less the 1962 line, but no different from where the line stood in, say, May 2014, and no different from where it stood in July 2019. They have, as of where it stood on July 2019 or May 2014, there has been a disengagement 1.5 kilometers on the Chinese side and 1.5 kilometers on the Indian side.
Now, define disengagement for us.
Disengagement is very simple. It's basically where you are not within line of sight of each other, where you are not within shooting distance of each other, where you are not in a position to get into scuffles or fist fights or worse. Basically to prevent physical contact between the two forces.
So one of the other arguments trotted out is that you can expect China to attack again sometime in November timeframe when the weather becomes more favorable to them. And assuming that something like that happens, that India should be tactically, getting ready for that, getting all the supplies in place and, people to stay and so on and so forth. Is that the thinking currently doing the rounds in those defense departments?
Look, I don't. I personally feel the Chinese will initiate round 2. They've taken quite a bad beating. They have lost a lot of men, and the shame of it all is that they've behaved exactly like Pakistan did with their Mujahideen in Kargil. Those were regular troops. They refused to acknowledge their bodies. They refused to acknowledge the deaths. They refused to give them public, funerals, state funerals, and so on and so forth. China's behaving the same way, which is terrible for morale. So they need to restore morale, and just to restore morale, they will need a round 2.
So Abhijit, I remember watching on YouTube a video where there is a Pakistani military officer saluting an Indian officer, and the Indian officer is telling in English, "These are your bodies. You're going to take them and give them a decent burial." And the guy nods very humbly. This is after the post-Kargil war. And whatever be the government statement, but there is YouTube proof to say that there was a transfer of bodies.
But I don't know what the relevance to this is.
I'm just saying that no matter what the government says as denial, at the actual ground there was a transfer of.
Look, the point here is it doesn't matter if there was a transfer of bodies or not. The point is China has refused to publicly acknowledge its war dead. It is debilitating for morale. It is a deeply demoralizing act when you do that. And it never goes down well with the troops. Which is why, in order to avenge the fact that we have probably ended up killing more of their troops than they did of ours, and almost certainly injuring a lot more than they did of ours, plus the fact that they could not acknowledge their war dead, they will go in for round 2. There is no doubt in my mind about that.
When you say round two of talks or round two of skirmishes?
Round two of killings.
Okay.
Let's be clear about it. It is going to be deadly clashes. It isn't going to be some kind of mild salami slicing. It is going to be some kind of violent action.
Well, now, as things stand, India has road access to Dawlati Bay Goldi Airport, and it is capable of landing and taking off planes from there. As a deterrent, can India ward off any kind of round two?
No, we can't. And the problem is because we never take a particularly aggressive posture on these things. We're always reactive to the Chinese. We won't be able to deter the Chinese from doing anything. The problem also, remember here, is that we don't know what the Chinese plan to do. It's almost impossible to predict because they keep moving troops around. But when will they choose to actually activate those troops? Because you see, your equipment inventory, your force levels are tangibles. Intention is an intangible. The same force that is lying there quite peacefully can at some point turn into a malign force. It can be a benign force that will help you during an earthquake or something, but it can also turn into a malign force. So the point is, I don't think we've got enough intelligence on them to interpret what they're trying to do. We don't have intelligence in Beijing. We don't have intelligence in local intelligence. We don't have the kind of early warning systems we require. And if you go by a lot of what our neighbors in the Indo-Pacific say, our intelligence services are quite compromised when it comes to China.
Well, not just the intelligence services. My information is that there are other services also quite compromised, and the Chinese have this concept of BGY, and people know what BGY means. Essentially, use any which way you can to compromise your adversary, and then use that to blackmail them. The long and short of it is, if if China decides to again come back and start playing mischief, how ready is India?
Look, we're always ready for them in that sense. There's nothing that's going to be all that, catastrophic. The catastrophe sets in if you set in for a long, prolonged war, in a sense. If it's a short war, you can hold your own quite well. In a long war, what happens is their industrial strength comes to play.
Yes.
In a short war, it's the geography that goes against them, that they have to operate at 10,000 feet. We can start operating at about 1,000 feet. Right. So there's a lot of, to and fro out there in that sense. It's not... I'm cautiously optimistic. And the point remains that I don't think China or India will ever let this go to a full-scale war.
Neither side can afford it. Point taken. Last question, Abhijit. In all this fracas, why is the messaging from part of India being so confused? Like, for example, India's special representative meets their special representative. There's a 2-hour talk. Why can't India come out and say, what are the points that were discussed? So there is a clear sense of where things are headed.
Look, the problem here is that you can't say a lot of things out in public, because even an acknowledgement of where the line of actual control is becomes problematic. It becomes a sort of cartographic fait accompli where you've revealed your hand to somebody else in that sense. So the government, both the Indian government and the Chinese government, will never put out an official map. But if you actually read the special representative's statement that was released, it was quite clear that they were deeply disappointed. It says somewhere that we are deeply disappointed by the kind of yellow journalism going on and the exaggerated claims made as to where the LAC lies, which is true. Because what you're seeing is you have a whole bunch of uninformed opinion. You have basically guesses. He said, she said. No documentary evidence save what Nirupama Rao provided us with. Basically masquerading around as absolute certainty. Okay. Now, even I don't claim with absolute certainty this is what it is. It's just what I have chosen based on what Google has told us. and based on what we've seen in the Agricultural Survey of India and the Ministry of Environment documents. So, I mean, if these people want to go around muddying the waters in that sense, by all means do it. But we've been as clear as can be on the actual, as much as you can be under the situation.
Now, I forgot to ask you one last question. I'm sorry, I'll ask you this question. Now, the new law has been passed in Hong Kong, and China is applying pressure to try and get some of these dissidents who are holed up in the United States to come back home and face trial under this new law. How do you see this play out? I don't think US is going to let anybody out of their side. However, there are lots of students of the top leadership of China studying in universities like Harvard and Yale and so on. At some point, they might have to return home. Do you think that kind of escalation could happen?
It would be good to see all Chinese students kicked out of US universities. The issue is, are the universities prepared for that kind of revenue loss? Will they challenge Trump if he enacts that law? They're suing him already about students home. The thing is, Australian universities are much more dependent because their fees are somewhat less, and a lot more Chinese students go there as a percentage of the whole. So let's see. I don't think the universities will give it up without a fight. But remember, just today, Trump has announced that he's at least ordering the administration to start looking at ways of rescinding the tax-exempt status of universities, which I think is a very good step, I mean, if these universities are making so much money, they really shouldn't be they should be paying taxes and paying back to the community. They're not doing it as charity. They're doing it for profit after all.
Yes, indeed. In fact, there's an interesting story about how Stanford University came into being. Leland Stanford had gone to meet the president of Harvard to give a donation on behalf of his deceased son. And he was willing to donate up to like 1.5 million or something like that. This happened in the last century. And the president of Harvard was too busy to meet with this man who had made his money supplying tools for people to do gold digging in the gold rush of 1850s. So he got miffed, and then he came back home and he said, why don't I start my own university in the memory of my son? And that's how Stanford University was born. So this kind of gives you the mindset of how Harvard used to behave. I'm talking about early 1900s or something like that. So very, very interesting conversation there, Abhijit. And we'll be back with more such interesting conversations. There's always something going on in the world, especially in your part of the woods. And now it's also US, I guess, because US is starting to patrol the South China Sea. So who knows where things will lead to. Thank you very much, Abhijit, and we'll talk to you soon. Har har Mahadev.